What is spiritual intelligence and how does it differ from IQ and EQ?
Okay, great question. So most of us know IQ, which is cognitive intelligence, and we've been fortunate as humanity that with our cognitive intelligence, we landed on the moon, we split the atom, we deciphered the genome. Now we have AI that's smarter than many of us, like myself. And that has to do with, all kinds of components, reading comprehension, composition, processing speed, and, logical reasoning, etc. So I think most of us know what that is. Then we have emotional intelligence, which came into the fourth in 1990 by two academicians that came up with that concept. And basically, what it is the ability to be aware of and draw on emotional resources to help ourselves in daily life. So, up until 1990 and later, this concept going mainstream, we used to think emotion is in opposition to reason, and someone was emotional, they're not reasonable or something like that. But now we understand, no, emotional information and resources are super important to our life and well-being. And if we can intelligently use that, it helps us. Okay. So awareness and ability to draw on emotional resources to help us in daily life. That's emotional intelligence. Okay, so what is spiritual intelligence? By analogy, the ability to be aware of, draw on, and embody spiritual resources. So I'll just pause there for 1 second. And then the next question will be like, okay, I know what emotional resources are, but what are spiritual resources? What are you talking about? So spiritual resources are these qualities that have been celebrated for thousands of years by all the world's spiritual traditions. So for my research, I interviewed teachers across all the world's wisdom traditions, from Buddhism, Hinduism, shamanism, Taoism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and so on. And I had at least 4 leaders, teachers in each, and I wanted to see, do they share common, they obviously all have very different theologies and different cosmologies. Islam says Muhammad was the final prophet, and Christianity says Jesus was the Messiah, and Buddhism might say there's no self, and the Buddha was enlightened or whatever. But they all have different language, different theologies, different cosmology. But what was exciting is that regardless, they all speak of the same qualities as virtues: live with purpose, live to serve, have trust, express gratitude, practice compassion, practice forgiveness, practice presence, be humble and egoless. So these qualities are universal. And so I call those spiritual qualities and resources that are universal across all the traditions. And so the ability to draw on and embody these resources is what spiritual intelligence is. So let me just make a couple more distinctions to help unpack this, which is the emphasis is the drawing on these resources and embodying them in daily life. So that's in contrast with a spiritual belief system. I may have a spiritual belief system in God, or, in reincarnation of the soul, whatever it might be. That's a spiritual belief system. I might have a spiritual experience. I go to church on Sunday, I pray, I meditate, I go and...
Hello, it's Brad Hook here, and I'm delighted to share my new book, Start with Values. It is a guide to help you discover what matters most and then bring those core values to life through tools such as micro habits. It helps you make clearer decisions through the decision-making guide. It helps you to activate your values in conversations, particularly those courageous conversations where you need to assert yourself. And it helps you explore some potential shared values, such as nature stewardship, to help us all look after this planet that we call home. Inside, you'll find thought experiments, you'll find worksheets, you'll find action plans, and lots more. If you are interested in reducing your stress and building a life that's meaningful and purposeful, get your copy now. They're available on Amazon, both as a paperback book, such as this, and in Kindle format. So if you have some feedback, please log it in the reviews. I'd love to hear your experience of bringing your values to life. This approach has helped hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and it's now ready for you. Get your copy.
Walk in the woods and I feel one in nature. Those are spiritual experiences, and they may be important and informative and so on. But what spiritual intelligence is interested in is, okay, how do I behave in my team meeting? Am I driven by my ego to be right? Or am I motivated by my inner guidance to do what is right? And, when I'm driving on the freeway, am I feeling like disconnected from everyone? I've got this metal box like a tank around me called the car, and I'm in a dog-eat-dog world, and I'm going to be very aggressive and not let people in on the ramp and off and so on. But if I understand my connectivity and my interdependence, then my experience and how I behave in those environments is very different. How do I relate to my partner? Am I trying to be right in my partnership? Lots of couples, I counsel couples that are like focused on who's right, as opposed to, oh, you're the person I love and your well-being is my well-being, and we're connected. There's a we is beyond the boundary of my skin encapsulated ego. So spiritual intelligence is how we behave and how we embody these qualities. I just rattled off a whole bunch of them, and there were 22 of them in my research, and etc.
I definitely want to touch on the couples work that you do before we finish up today. But first, is spiritual intelligence innate or cultivated or maybe remembered?
Wow, that's a good question. So this is speculation. I can't say it from my research, but what I can say, which I believe, is some level of it is innate. Like, so when we talk about these qualities of forgiveness or gratitude or compassion, certainly compassion is innate to our human heart. You could see pre-verbal babies and how they react to videos, and they're drawn to look at kind acts and repulsed away from violence. So some level of compassion seems to be programmed into us, however way you believe it, whether it's through our DNA or through some other kind of mechanism. But these qualities are innate to the extent that some level of them is there. But, how we express them in our capacity is different. So, our human body has all these muscles. Even when we're infants, every muscle that you and I have is already there. But, when we're 1 year old, those muscles are very weak and we can't stand up and walk or even roll over. So we have to build those muscles. So I think that's a reasonable analogy. We have these inherent capacities for, celebrating life, for joy, for gratitude, for forgiveness, for compassion through life's woundings, for whatever. Those capacities atrophy or get covered up. And then we have to go through an intentional, conscious set of practices to build those muscles. And it's not a once and done thing, just like with our muscles. We have to keep practicing it to stay in good shape.
I hear a lot about the crisis of meaning, and particularly in the age of AI, where potentially, we're not sure yet, but many people's jobs will be automated. Maybe there'll be a universal basic income or something like that. Do you think this is where spiritual intelligence can help us to connect to what really matters as a species, rather than us just relying on our rational brains to come up with solutions?
Yeah, totally. I think then, so just like with the industrial age, up until the industrial age, a lot of humanity was focus on manual labor. Or even if you wind the clock back further, at some part of human history, I forget, like some huge percentage of humanity was involved in agriculture. because we had to just grow the food, and so on. But as we became into a more modern age, I think these days I read somewhere that 3% of humanity is involved in agriculture because there's so much automation and farming and so on. So 3% of humanity can produce enough food to feed the 100%. So, what happened to those 70, 80, or however many percent that used to be engaged in agriculture that no longer needed? Well, a lot of those things became industrial jobs on an assembly line.
Hey, Brad here. Would you believe that around 70% of the people who watch this podcast have not yet subscribed? It would mean the world to us if you click that subscribe button on whichever platform you use, so that we can stay connected with you and you'll receive notifications when we add new episodes. We really appreciate you coming and connecting with us and being part of our community. So all the best.
And whether it's manufacturing cars or whatever. But then there's another technological revolution. We have robots. So a lot of those jobs got taken away. So people became office workers or service industry, or we talk about knowledge workers, where basically it's not your body and your muscles, it's like your ability to think and synthesize information, etc., in a variety. And now AI is gonna threaten some of those jobs. So again, we're gonna have to reinvent what is our unique value added. And I do think that spiritual intelligence, number one, differentiates us from AI. And AI can appear compassionate, and some people have fallen into making AI their companion. But there's been some real problems with some of those people that then get disillusioned. And it's different than when you have another human being and you have the resonance in your mirror neurons where you feel the compassion and you feel those things, versus just nice words that some chatbot can say, oh, I'm so sorry to hear of this loss of yours. And and some people are lonely enough that they get hooked into that. But I do think that there's something about our humanity and our spirit that is irreplaceable by AI. And then it requires us to then engage in those pursuits, one, to give ourselves meaning and to be of true service, that what we can do that AI cannot.
A lot of people are asking those questions, what should I do in order to find meaning? And I think your book is a fantastic resource. So the link is in the show notes. Would you recommend someone who's starting off on the journey of developing their spiritual intelligence follow a specific path? Or do you think people can cherry pick and find tools that work for them to help them awaken that capacity?
When you say specific path, do you mean like, okay, Theravada Buddhism, or yoga, or mystical Judaism, or Sufi path, or whatever in Islam, or mystical Christianity? I think people can pick from multiple paths. There are different tools. And I think at some point, getting deeper in one path is valuable. I mean, for me, I draw on practices from Buddhism. There's some beautiful practices for meditation, for loving kindness, metta practices, for compassion, something called Tonglen, that I've really found very powerful in the Buddhist path. At the same time, I draw on a bunch of stuff from the yogic world, in Kundalini yoga, and and embodiment practices from Qigong and so on, to awaken certain energies in the body and open me up. And I've also, so those are paths I've, found particular practices important. And I also went deep in a path called the Diamond Approach, which is a synthesis of Tibetan Buddhism, Sufism, and modern depth psychology that works with the unconscious. And because a lot of the things also have to do with our unconscious. And then, but of late, my main path has become the Jewish mystical path of Kabbalah, which is the tradition I was originally raised in, and then I was disillusioned with traditional religion and spirituality, and I kind of denied it all because of all the harm that was done. But then I discovered that something in my soul called me to connect with those roots in my life. But I'm not practicing it in the same way that Orthodox Jews would or whatever, but it's the mystical branch of the esoteric branch of Judaism that I find a lot of value in. So, but that's in terms of traditions. But going back to spiritual intelligence, you can work on these qualities, like you talked about meaning, and your book is about values. And I think one of the key things where we derive meaning is when our actions line up with our values, and that's what gives us meaning. And part of what gives us meaning is a sense of purpose and knowing that we're in service. So you could go down these traditional paths. I mentioned some of the spiritual traditions that I draw on. But you could just try and discover your calling, your purpose outside in the context of a tradition. So in the Japanese culture, they talk about the ikigai, which is that convergence between what I'm good at, what I enjoy and love doing, and what contributes to others. So independent of any path, I can ask myself, okay, what are the gifts that life has given me beyond the gift of life itself, which is the biggest gift? But then each of us are unique in what our gifts are, what our talents are. Somebody may be a great talented musician, someone else is a great mathematically oriented mind and they want to be a programmer, and someone else has a great eye for visual things and maybe they become a graphic designer or an artist or a painter, or someone else is great with words and they are an author, a writer, an editor. Someone else might be a great curious mind and a great listener and has a great presence, and they decide, I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to bring in good people like you're doing, whatever it is. So we all have our set of talents that we're good at. And then we ask ourselves, okay, because when we express those talents and actualize them, we have a sense of mastery. So we're naturally good at it. And when we're naturally good at something, we tend to going to enjoy it. And then when we ask ourselves, how can I use that to contribute to people around me? Then that gives us also a sense of purpose and meaning and belonging. So I'm not just doing my, I might be a great musician and I enjoy playing my guitar. Not that I can't do it, but I could play my guitar at home. But that's gonna only go so far as meaning, until when I start playing the guitar for other people, whether it's my kids or my family or a large audience, and I become a musician. I feel like, okay, my talent is now contributing to lots of people outside of me, and that's going to give me meaning and purpose. And then my life has value and I'm needed. And I am now an integral part of the web of life. Because one of the biggest challenges we're facing these days is a sense of isolation and alienation and loneliness. And so when I actualize my talents and gifts and use that to contribute to others, then my life, I'm needed. There's some reason I'm on here on this planet Earth. And that is a unique thing. Each of us, 14 billion years into the evolution of the universe, 8 billion human beings, there's never been another Bradley, there's never been another John Smith or Yosi Amram or whatever that's like me. Maybe somebody else had that name, but that collection of experiences and talents is unique. And, it's like life is inviting us to say, hey, I'm giving you these things, play your role. I'm giving you this instrument, which is you. And I'm giving you this score sheet. I'm giving you this collection of other musicians to play with. So play your instrument in harmony, and then you're part of the symphony. But this is my instrument. I'm going to play it. I'm going to play it in the way that only I can play, because there is nobody else who has that instrument and the same score sheet, the same song. I need to play my song, but I want to play my song, in harmony, as opposed to just go in the corner and scream against everybody. And
Makes
this is
so
my.
much sense. That idea of being needed, practice until you have a gift to share. And then that feeling of being needed, I think, is so important. And you see it with sports people who are a superstar on the field. And then the natural progression is to become a coach and to mentor the next generation, because then they're still needed. There's a sense of that belonging and connection, and your skills are valued because you're now passing them on. What a nice philosophy for life, is to master skills, grow yourself, and then contribute back and then help the next generation.
Yeah, well, people talk. I mean, Erickson talked about life stages, and one of them is generativity. And when we get to a certain stage, what we want is to pass on the wisdom we've gained and the gifts we've gained to the next generation, like you're talking about. And we can, share our talents and contribute even before we're in that stage of life. However that is. I mean, as staying even with the athletic thing, the person who's playing some sport, whether it's soccer, European soccer, or global soccer, or American football, or whatever, they're bringing their talent, even if it's physical, and they're contributing. And you can watch a great sports team. There's beauty in it, and how it's kind of like this symphony, how they pass the ball and how they coordinate it, and whatever. And that's why people like to watch sports, because there's an elegance and beauty with these people actualizing their potential as an incarnated human body. I mean, the human body could do so many amazing things with sports, with dancing, with whatever it is.
It is incredible. It is incredible. That is very much spirit in action. When you see these people who've mastered it, and now they're no longer thinking, they're in that flow state and they're just performing in real time. And often they don't remember it. They watch the video and go, I have no memory of what I was doing. It just happened.
Yeah, well, it's happening through me. So like you said, it's a flow state. At some point, it's not an egoic thing. I'm thinking of every move. It's just like life. I become such a good attuned instrument that life uses me. And I mean, but that's the greatest reward when we're in that flow state. And this is such an oxymoron, because I'm not there, but I am. I'm not there doing it, but it's being done through me, and I am doing it, of course, at some level.
I often experience that when running workshops, and people ask me questions that if someone sent me an email with that question, I'd have to really think about it and compose an answer, maybe ask AI for some help, and then come back. But in the midst of a workshop, it's like it just happens. And the answers, I don't know if they're good or bad, but generally they seem to turn out okay.
Well, a lot of my best client session in coaching and in therapy, the words are just coming out in my mouth. I mean, like even right now, the words are just coming out my mouth. Yeah. I mean, of course I am talking, but it's just kind of like, I don't know, you got me untrained, and I'm like, I'm just entrained, and the words are just coming out.
I love that. And that's one of the things I love about this kind of work, is having those moments where technology is out of the question. Can you imagine standing up in front of an audience or in a coaching call and you've got your phone on the table, or it doesn't happen. For a short while, you give yourself full freedom to be present and be there for people. And I think it's an experience everyone should at least try a few times in their life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I think the word you use is flow state is a good one. And, if I can pronounce his name, Csikszentmihalyi, who developed this concept, is, found that this is like most fulfilling experiences. And there's a way in which we're totally present, but in a way not with our egoic sense of self. And there's been some research that actually highlights the parallels between flow states and non-dual states that are spiritual states. So in a sense, flow states, when you're so absorbed in something, it's like you're not there, but you're absorbed in it. Like, you might be watching a movie or reading a great novel, and you forget that you're watching a movie. You're so absorbed in the movie because the plot is so engaging or the book is so engaging. And then someone comes in and says, what are you doing, or what were you doing 5 minutes ago? And you put the book and the movie down, and then you say, oh, that was me, I was watching a movie. But when you're in it, you're absorbed. And we say that, I'm absorbed in what I'm doing. And those are beautiful experiences. It's not like a loss of self. We think, oh, I lost myself in it. But the most ecstatic moments, even dare I bring up, but when we're making love, we could be absorbed in the thing, and it's an ecstatic moment. We could be lost in our lovers or our beloved's eyes. We're just so connected and so absorbed in their eyes, and it's like we merge. We're no longer clear about where's my boundary, where do I end, where do you begin. And that's a beautiful thing. It's not like a loss. Oh, I lost my, something I'm grieving about. It's not. I lost myself into something bigger. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
And when we are lost into something bigger, and then we become that bigger thing.
I've been listening to many different theories on what consciousness is. Is consciousness pervasive? Panpsychism says that everything is consciousness and matter emerges from that. And this gets very philosophical. In fact, the physicists are deferring to philosophers to say, we actually don't know, because when we start looking at the quantum fields and so forth, it just gets weird. But there's a very nice philosophy by Thomas Campbell called My Big Toe, My Big Theory of Everything. And he hypothesizes that it's almost a simulation, so the simulation theory, and we are avatars that kind of tune in, and we can manipulate it in different ways if we try and put in the effort and meditate and connect with our spirituality. And he says that the way to interact with this reality is through love and kindness. And when we act with love and kindness, we expand our influence within this realm, which I think is really interesting. Do you have any thoughts about consciousness and reality? And Tim Ferriss once said, reality is negotiable. And I think that's quite an interesting idea.
I have thoughts. Yeah. I mean, I've been very interested in this thing called the mind-body problem, which I think is what you're talking about. What is the relationship of consciousness to physicality and matter? And, I have my own theories and ideas. I don't know that I can prove them or whatever. What I do know in a deeper visceral sense is what you said, which is the value of loving kindness. And regardless of what theory of consciousness and whether consciousness emerges out of microtubule things in the Roger Penrose and Hamanoff, they have their theory of how consciousness emerges in quantum fluctuations in the brain and whatever. I mean, I know a lot of different things, but my point is, or the simulation hypothesis, whatever. My point is, what I find most important, most practical, is when I bring loving kindness to my interactions, my sense of self expands. I feel open-hearted. There's a warmth in my heart. I feel more connection. I feel like my life has more value and meaning, and it goes back to I'm contributing. People turn to me because I'm now a channel of mixed metaphor for divine light to flow through me. And then I'm like radiating through like the sun, and the flowers and the trees all turn towards the sun. And so, when I'm that channel for kindness and love, I'm nourishing life, and I'm part of this life force that flows through me. And so that's a beautiful experience when I'm remembering myself, we think about remembering something about the past, but I'm talking about member. So I become a member, remember myself into the web of life. So again, now I'm part of something bigger than myself. And like in the human body, every cell, every organ has its own unique purpose and meaning and functioning. And even though all the cells in the human body come from the same stem cell DNA, so all the cells come out of the bone marrow and whatever, but from early on, they differentiate. One cell decides, and somehow, we don't know how, I'm going to be a retina, and another one's going to be a thyroid, another one's going to be a neuron, another one's going to be a heart, another one's going to be a fingernail, and another one's going to be, something else. Now, you can say, well, obviously the heart and the neurons are more important. Maybe. But you need the whole for optimal functioning. And so, the thyroid cell is doing its thyroid job, not thinking, oh, why did I get to be a thyroid and you got to be the heart, and you're more important, or you're the brain and you're controlling me. I don't like that. No, it just knows that this is my job. I'm part of this organ, and I got to take care of myself. I have a cell membrane. I have an individuality. This is not to deny that there's also our individuality, our uniqueness. So the cell has to take care of itself. And if you look at it, it's incredible. It's in complexity. And we still don't understand how the first single cell organism came to life. Nobody knows. It's a mystery, because statistics and chance just doesn't compute. So it has to take care of itself as an individual cell, but it has to do its job in the context of the organ, so that the organ functions and contributes to the organism in it. But if the organism gets sick, the cell can do all its magic within itself, but if the organism is sick, it's going to get sick and wither away and die, unfortunately. If the organism gets cancer or whatever, God forbid, so to speak. We have our unique role.
Yeah.
And as individuals, but we have to embed ourselves into the larger context and contribute. And we all have a unique role to contribute, even though at some essential level, we're all equal. All the cells in the human body come from the same stem cells, from the same DNA. All humanity, if I was to use the biblical language, is made in the image and likeness of God. So, regardless of who and what you are, whether you're the president of the United States or the president of Russia or whatever it is, your inherent value is in your is inherent to being human. We have to understand we're all expressions of the same life force. And that makes our life sacred, because life is sacred. And if each expression of life is sacred. So when we recognize that, then our value is more inherent, and we're not on this constant treadmill comparing ourselves to other. Oh, I'm valuable because I make more money. Oh, I'm valuable because I have more followers on Instagram, or I'm valuable because, this, that, or the other, because my book got the gold medal award, which I'm proud of. But
as you should be.
Yeah, so we all have our egos, including me, and but there's something deeper that gives my life meaning and value, and it's not that those things, which are nice to get.
I agree. I mean, I recently read that we share about 50% of our DNA with mushrooms, with fungus. It's sobering when you realize that life is so connected, that it comes from a single source at some point, and we don't know how. So we really don't have all of the answers.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to touch quickly on leadership, because many of the audience who tune into this podcast are entrepreneurs. What's the difference between inspiration and motivation?
Well, I think, there's some relationship, obviously, but I think motivation could be, I can give you motivation by saying, okay, if you do this, I'll raise your salary by, I'll give you a bonus or whatever. That could be motivating. I can give you a compliment. That could be motivating. Nothing wrong with motivating employees with with financial rewards, with positive feedback, etc. I think inspiration goes something deeper. I mean, inspiration. So, what is the word? Is inspiration. So, spirit comes from Latin, the animating breath of life. So, inspiration basically is something deeper that activates our life force, and comes from spirit. If I were to use spiritual language, so when we are inspired, our life force is activated. Now, when we're motivated, indirectly, it might do something similar. Like, okay, I'm gonna work extra hard and I'm gonna get a raise, But I don't know. Then it's like it comes into effort. Like, okay, I really don't want to work so hard, but because I don't like my work, but I want to buy this nicer car, and I'm going to work extra hard the next 6 months so I can get my overtime and get my bonus, whatever, and I'll buy a car. That's an effort. That's not going to be so fun. It's not just a natural outflow that sprang forth from my life, where there's joy and intrinsic. So okay. This is I'm just kind of, as I'm talking it out loud, it's coming through from me. So inspiration would be more intrinsic motivation.
Yes.
Versus because it's coming from our essence, from our life force, from our spirit. Whereas motivation can be externally driven, the way I normally think about it. That's why I was thinking of the examples of getting a compliment from someone else and getting a raise or whatever. Now, actually, this is interesting. I'm also remembering that there was research. So we were talking about sports earlier. So a lot of athletes that used to enjoy the game, whatever they were doing, whether it was basketball or soccer or whatever, they just did it for the intrinsic enjoyment.
Yeah.
When they become professionals and they're getting millions of dollars of contract, it becomes work. And, it's been researched that they now don't enjoy the game so much because they're doing it for the tens of millions, and some of the top athletes, I don't know, make astronomical amount of money. So all of a sudden, something that was intrinsically motivating, that came through just their life force and who they are, they naturally played basketball or soccer. Now they're doing it for the money, and all of a sudden the intrinsic joy is gone. So
that's a good
I
one.
think they lost their inspiration, I would say.
That's a really good example. And you hear it with people who become a world champion, for example, in mixed martial arts or something like that. And the old saying is, it's difficult to wake up and train when you're waking up in silk sheets. When you're hungry and you've got something to prove to the world, the motivation is intrinsic. You're doing it not for the money. You're doing it because there's this hunger. It's a nice it's a nice call to action for people to really try and connect to what inspires you, and to do a little bit of that, because that's where the magic lies.
Yeah, the magic would be a good word. But the problem also with these external motivations is you got to keep upping the dose. Yeah. So if the motivation is, okay, I'll work extra hard early in my career if you give me $1,000 raise. But, later on, I was like, okay, well, what's 1,000? I need 10,000. Yeah. And so people that have made $1 million are no longer excited about $1 million. You gotta go for the 10 million or the 100 million or whatever. And it just, you need a bigger dose to get the thrill. And, I'm purposely using language that, can lead people to addiction. But I think that is what can happen, is like, I need a bigger dose. I need a bigger bonus. I need a bigger thing. So no, I lost my intrinsic motivation. I'm no longer inspired to do this job because of inherently it's fulfilling and rewarding, and it fulfills my calling and my purpose, and I'm actualizing my thing. I'm doing it to prove that I have more money than so-and-so, or, and so that would be a motivator, but an external motivator that that doesn't carry as much meaning as something that inspires me.
Yeah, awakens that creativity and that desire just to do it for the sake of doing it. And that's, in my experience, that's the magic. It's, for me, it's going surfing. No one needs to motivate me to go surfing. All you need is for the waves to be good, or to work on some new app, or to write something. I love it. It's everything in between that gets stressful, but at least cultivate those opportunities to do the things that inspire you over the course of each week, and life will become more meaningful.
And those activities are intrinsically rewarding, as you.
Exactly. Yeah. No one has to pay me to go for a surf or to run a workshop. I would run workshops for free if I could, and I do run some for free, and it's even more fulfilling when you can do that.
Yeah.
Couples and relationships. How can we apply some of the principles of spiritual intelligence to relationships? I know you've talked about psycho-spiritual healing. And a follow-up to that is, I'd love to hear more about your work around masculinity.
Okay, boy.
In a few minutes.
Yeah, okay, masculinity. So, relationships. So I work with couples around conscious relationships and what I call now spiritually intelligent relationships. I'm about to start a study with 50 to 100 couples where we'll assess their spiritual intelligence, emotional intelligence, and attachment style, and look at what explains their relational satisfaction, just like I did for my original doctoral research around leadership that showed that spiritually intelligent leaders lead teams with greater morale, higher commitment, lower turnover, and so on. And some follow-on research showed that they produce better financial results for their business units, even when you control for emotional intelligence. So spiritual intelligence had a bigger effect and is complementary, not to replace it, but it was complementary and so on. So now I'm trying to do a similar study in couples and relationships to see, because the big thing everybody these days talks about in relationships, your attachment style. Are you anxious or anxious ambivalent, avoidant, secure attachment, and so on. And that seems to be a key for relational satisfaction and stability, etc., and an emotional intelligence. So I'm doing this research now, and we'll see what happens. I can't tell you what, but from my work with couples, when it doesn't take a big leap of faith to know that if I have compassion skills, that's going to improve my relationship. If I have, if I have non-egoic approach to relating, like I want us both to be happy as opposed to I want to be right, which comes from the ego. You get into a debate, you see a lot of that with couples, like, oh, you said this. No, I didn't say that. You said that. And then they're getting caught with who's right, whose version of history is right. And that's all coming from the ego that's trying to boost itself to make us feel good about ourselves by proving ourselves right, which puts us in competition with others. So when you get that kind of competition with your partner, with your life partner, with your romantic partner, that's not the best dynamic. And then we talked about purpose, okay? Our individual purpose and meaning. Now think about it in relationship. So a spiritually intelligent relationship would be like, I want to understand you as my partner's purpose and I want to support it. And I want you to understand my purpose in life and support it. And now, beyond our individual purpose, there's a purpose for our relationship, not only for us as individuals. And then you can ask yourself, what is the purpose of our relationship? It could be to raise a family. It could be to model something. It could be that some couples come together to do some work together, to spread love and peace in the world, whatever it is. So you could start thinking about, just like an organization or a company has a mission statement and has a purpose for it and a vision of what it's trying to do in the world, a partnership between two individuals in a romantic relationship can have a mission statement and a sense of purpose. And then we'll say something else that ties into what you do as a set of values. So, companies have values. These are corporate values. But in a couple, you can have a set of values which are kind of form your constitution of how we relate. And so we practice forgiveness, we practice compassion, we, whatever our guiding principles. So when we have that shared, and that gives us a framework to deal with our id or animal soul or whatever language you want to say, because human beings without training, we're gonna our impulses are not always the most beautiful and pure. We might lose our temper and curse and yell and say insulting things. But if we have this set of principles that we bought into, okay, we practice consciousness, we practice mindfulness, we speak the truth, we're devoted to each other, then that puts the training, the guardrails, and I would say the training wheels to cultivate these same qualities of spiritual intelligence. So all the same qualities. I mean, another important one that would be hugely important in a couple is presence. I mean, you see couples, you go to a restaurant, you see two people, they're each on their phone, they're drifting away, they go home, they're sharing a meal, but they're thinking, their mind is elsewhere, whether it's during a meal or during lovemaking. People are not there, not in their bodies, not making eye contact. So, and we feel it when our partner is not paying attention and tuned. It's like they're not there. Then why am I going to be open and vulnerable and intimate? I don't mean just physically intimate, but why am I going to share my intimate, vulnerable feelings when my partner is not listening? So it's like I'm not important. So I'm just saying all the same qualities of spiritual intelligence that are going to be valuable and important in a business context are going to be important and valuable in a romantic relationship. And, that's going to improve the quality and satisfaction and the depth.
Absolutely. And final question on that masculinity. Do you think it's important for men to reconnect with their masculine essence? And I don't know, there is a lot of advice out there to kind of suppress it, I suppose. Like, don't be these tendencies towards assertiveness and so on. And I see differences between men and women in my own life. So that's, I don't know if that's a controversial thing to say anymore. I'm not sure, but
it is controversial.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to draw some distinction between masculinity and men. So masculinity refers to a certain quality and which has to do, like what you said, with assertiveness. I would say has to do with initiative and so on. But those qualities are not limited to men. They,
sure.
Women need to be assertive. And then
Definitely.
you say, what is the feminine? And the feminine to me is receptive and nurturing. And so I think our job as men, or at least the way I look at it, is to not deny our assertiveness, our initiative, our vision, our drive. Those are great qualities. And we need to take pride in being a man. The problem is, I don't know what it is in New Zealand, but there was this whole attack on men because of toxic masculinity and because all the shadow side of men, that the violence and the rapes and the sexual abuse and so on. So then masculinity and manhood took a big beating. And then even I carried for a long time group level shame about being a man, not just for what I did, but just because I'm a member of this group, a species called men that have done so many wars and have done so much damage and violence. And so then when men, we carry that shame and we don't carry ourselves with dignity, it disempowers us. And I don't think it makes us attractive to women. I think a woman wants to be with a man who has the confidence and the presence and, the initiative. Now, that's not to put her down. And that's not to say that a woman can't be assertive. I think she should be. And that's not to say that we as men shouldn't be receptive. I mean, if you're going to have a relationship, I need to be receptive to you. So that would be a feminine quality that so the thing is, we don't want to take away our masculinity. What we want to do is just take the healthy side of it as opposed to the shadow side, and then complement it with a certain amount of healthy femininity. But for most men, we're going to lean more on the masculine if you just look at it statistically. And most women will lean more. But, again, there's some men that could be more on the receptive, soft, nurturing side and so on. So
there's no right or wrong. It's kind of connect with who you are and live that. Don't deny it.
Yeah, don't deny it. But also, hopefully, don't hold shame about the gender you are, whether it's a man or woman or anything.
Yosi, thank you so much. Where would you like people to go to find out more?
Well, they can go to my book, Spiritually Intelligent Leadership, available on anywhere books are available. And then I have a nonprofit, awakeningspiritualintelligence.org, or awakeningsi.org for short. That would be the easiest. I mean, I have a YouTube channel, Awakening Spiritual Intelligence. There's YosiAmram.net, but most people won't know how to spell it, so I'm not going to even try. And
the link will be in the show notes to all of them, and I highly recommend everyone check out the book and follow you on YouTube and wherever else. I'll include all of those links. Yosi, any final thoughts for those who are still with us?
I'll get a little philosophical here. Everything in our universe is limited in resources. So if I have $100, I give you $1, I have $1 less. I have a certain amount of milk in my fridge, I give you, a glass, I have less. I have a certain amount of love in my heart. I share it with you. Do I have less love in my heart?
Not at all.
Not at all. Maybe it feels good. Maybe it expands my heart. So, it goes back to what you said. Sharing loving kindness. I think that grows our capacity for love and kindness. It feels good, and maybe it will come back to us from that person, or maybe not. But independent of that, we've put out something good that feels good for ourselves, and that's a self-perpetuating machine, which in physics they say you can't get a perpetual motion machine. But if you practice loving kindness, you get a perpetual motion machine for loving kindness. So
I love that. Thank you so much, Yosi. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time.